On January 1st, 1995, Fred West was found dead in his prison cell, hung from a blanket tied into a noose. He was almost a month away from his court date for killing at least 10 girls. The first murder committed by Fred and his wife Rose was his daughter Charmaine. Rose had run away from home and at 17 was put in charge of 3 girls while 29-year-old Fred did time in prison. The 3 girls were Heather Ann, Anne Marie, and Charmaine. While only Heather Ann was Rose's biological daughter, all 3 girls were instructed to call her mom. While Fred was away, Rose began to abuse the children. Anne Marie would cry and react to the abuse, but Charmaine would seem unbothered. Rose wanted a reaction, so in June 1997 she went so far as to kill 8-year-old Charmaine. Only 2 months later, Catherine West, Fred's first wife, came looking for her daughter Charmaine, concerned for her safety. She was never seen again. It is believed that Catherine was strangled to death in the back of Fred's car while she was intoxicated. With her remains, they found a piece of metal tubing, indicating possible restraint or sexual assault before her murder. Her body was extensively dismembered and placed into plastic bags and buried in a field close to the house. Fred West was raised in Herefordshire by Walter and Daisy West. Walter was a disciplinarian and Daisy was very overprotective. However, both abused Fred and his 5 siblings. Fred had 2 major head injuries from a motorcycle crash and being pushed off a second-story balcony. As a teenager, Fred got into petty theft and other crimes. He also molested young girls and impregnated his sister, involving himself in incest and bestiality frequently. At the end of his teen years, his family disowned him. When he was 21, he became reacquainted with and married Catherine Rena Costello, whom he had previously dated. At the time of their marriage, Rena was pregnant with someone else's child, Charmaine, who they told was adopted. They had another daughter, Anne Marie, later on. In 1966, Rena devised a plan to leave him due to the numerous affairs and his attacks on her and her daughters becoming more violent. She was eventually able to leave, but her daughters stayed in Fred's care. Fred had also gotten 18-year-old Anne McFall pregnant around this time, and after Rena ran away, she told Fred to divorce her. This angered him, and he murdered her, cutting off her fingers and toes and ensuring that her baby was dead. Afterwards, he dumped her body in Fingerpost Field by his house. Later on, he met Rose. Rose was raised by Bill and Daisy Letts. Daisy had depression and went through electroconvulsive therapy during and after her pregnancy with Rose, which may have injured her as a fetus. Bill was schizophrenic and repeatedly was violent and sexually abused Rose and her older sister Patricia. Rose was a rebellious kid and began to molest her younger brothers Graham and Gordon at age 13. She first met Fred at a bus stop when she was just 15. He was 27. She was initially repulsed, but after a few weeks of him following her, she agreed to go out with him. Eventually, they ran away together due to her parents' disapproval, and she began taking care of his kids, had their own children, and got married. From 1971 to 1987, Fred and Rose murdered and tortured 10-plus girls. They mainly focused on their own daughters, but also killed lodgers who stayed at their house, or girls living or visiting nearby. Rose had also become a prostitute with Fred's support and encouragement, and often forced the men and women to be subjected to pain or join with Fred and her. Some of these women were also killed or tortured. Both of the Wests were obsessed with bondage and violent sex acts, especially on underage girls. He had turned their cellar into a torture chamber, and his daughter, Anne Marie, became one of its first occupants. Subjected to a horrifically brutal rape by her father while her stepmother held her down, she was threatened with a beating if she told anyone. Also, in late 1972, they hired 17-year-old Caroline Owens as a nanny. She was held prisoner, stripped, and raped. She escaped and told police despite being threatened. These charges went nowhere. Over the next decade, more young schoolgirls became victims of similar violent sexual acts. After these brutal attacks, they were murdered, dismembered, and buried in the cellar under 25 Cromwell Street until the excavation in 1994. Early in 1994, the kids were playing outside and approached a policeman to ask, "What would you do if your father was abusing one of his daughters?" The discussion raised suspicions and got Fred arrested for the rape of one of his daughters. He was released after the kids refused to cooperate, but the children were placed in foster care. While in care, the social workers heard what they described as a family joke. The kids said Fred would threaten them by saying, "If you're naughty, you'll end up like Heather under the patio." Heather, being our oldest daughter who had allegedly run away with a lesbian lover at 16 with no trace, this raised suspicions. Police first got a warrant to search the 25 Cromwell Street garden on the 23rd of February, and this search lasted through July and expanded through the rest of their house, the neighboring garden of 26 Cromwell Street, and Fingerpost Field nearby after finding evidence of multiple human remains. While Fred died to suicide shortly before his trial, Rose was sentenced to life for the murder of 10 girls and lives today at age 71 in H.M. Prison, Newhall in West Yorkshire, still claiming her innocence. Their house has been torn down and turned into a pathway, honoring the kids who died.